Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and greetings to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Good to have you back this Sabbath, tuning in to the wisdom of Solomon in the Apocrypha. We are in the 11th chapter this week. Greet one another in the chat, all of you, and please do consider supporting Torah to the Tribes with your financial gifts. You can give by looking in the description below. And please also support one another in the communities by going to torahtothetribes.com/connect, where you can connect with your brethren on a Zoom platform. We have Shabbat Fellowship and other groups there for you. So let's delve right into the text today. We're going to go to the Wisdom of Solomon and chapter 11. I like to use the Brenton Septuagint. Those of you that have been tracking with me will delve right in with, of course, verse 1. She prospered their works in the hand of the holy prophet. They went through the wilderness that was not inhabited, and pitched tents in places there lay no way. So, of course, the she here is Chokmah, Sophia in the Greek. Divine wisdom is personified here in verse 1. The holy prophet, of course, refers to Moshe Rabbeinu, the archetypal Navi, prophet of Israel. But wisdom doesn't just instruct. We're seeing as we go through this text today that she empowers. The verb here in the text implies that there is a providential success through partnership with divine agency. Your life's going to be better. You're going to get the blessing when you partner with Elohim. So we see as the text unfolds that when Israel sinned, that Yahweh sent seraphs or fiery serpents. And what the people saw is they saw that a person is actually punished through the very things by which they sin. Now think about that for a moment. A person is punished through by which the very things through they sin. Because it was Yahweh who told Moshe to set up the bronze serpent. So those who looked at the bronze serpent would live. Look and live, and they would be healed. And it wasn't to worship, obviously, because that would have been a violation of the mitzvah, of the commandments. Truly, it was, as we know through the book of John, it was a foreshadowing, a prophecy of the future redemption through the blessed Son. So do you know, as we go through this, and we're in the 11th chapter, obviously, but divine wisdom, it can be requested to help your memory. Divine wisdom can be requested to give you eloquence of speech, to help in your understanding. And that would match Moshe Rabbeinu's role as speaker and leader and character. He requested these things. In Hebrews chapter 3, verse 5, it's written, Moshe was faithful in all his house as a servant. And then in Yochanan, John chapter 1, verse 17, it says, grace and truth came by Yahushua HaMashiach. But this isn't as a contradiction to Torah, but rather a fulfillment of Torah, or Sophia's presence in Torah, wisdom's presence in Torah. I mean, Moshe was successful. So if you and I want to be successful in life, we have to be able to identify and utilize the strengths of the people around us. We can't be lone soldiers. Moshe wasn't wise because he was a lone genius, but because he let wisdom prosper his work, and he, of course, had a divine delegation. He had a strategic delegation, and he had self-awareness. Moshe succeeds by knowing his limitations, and he let divine wisdom fill in the gaps and direct his paths. So this is really like liminal space theology here, where Yahweh leads through the midbar, the wilderness, where the Logos and the law, the Torah, are forged. Now, it's interesting, no way, in the Hebrew, embark, it signifies the death of human agency, meaning that opened the door for supernatural reliance. Think about that. In our own wilderness of life sometimes, in our own wilderness, just like Solomon, just like Moshe, when we retreat to consecrate ourselves to build the temple, if you will, right? Meaning there is a void before manifestation. There's a time where you go away and you consecrate yourself because you want to do something in the future. But there's a void before the manifestation. That's what it was like with Solomon. There was no temple, a void, and then there was the manifestation of the temple. Well, that's how it works. There has to be a purification in places that are inhabited only by angels and spirits, just like Israel's desert pilgrimage. We ourselves need to embark on our own desert pilgrimage. Any great person used by Yahweh has to go into the desert at some time. Of course, Yahusha himself in Mark and Luke was driven into the wilderness before ministry, which of course mirrors Israel's wandering, or mirrors our wandering, our wilderness out here in the nations. In John chapter 14, verse 6, it is written, I am the way. Well, if Yahusha is the way, then doesn't that also address the no way? Meaning, like, sometimes when you go onto the freeway and it says that, this is not an exit, or this is, wrong way. It's a big sign, wrong way. If Yahusha is the way, then what is the no way? The no way is the derek of void. Relying upon yourself, that is not the way. The way is, of course, Yahusha. He is the way. We've got to get out of our comfort zones. And sometimes a life shake-up will do just that. Something in your life just gets totally shaken up, and that will get you out of your comfort zone. Because, brethren, the reality is, comfort zones are where dreams go to die. You get so comfortable, then you don't dream. And we got to keep dreaming. We got to get stretched, and we got to get outside of our comfort zones. Israel had to leave Egypt, which was comfort. Yes, it was slavery, but they had to leave to go find freedom in the wilderness, which was a challenge, but it also brought an opportunity. Does that make sense? So if you're not willing to move through discomfort, you'll never pitch your tent in a future promised land that is waiting for you of divine blessing. Look at verse 3. They stood against their enemies and were avenged of their adversaries. So divine justice here comes into play through wisdom, and like I keep on saying, it isn't passive. Standing, nitzavim, it means to take a covenantal stand, like strength. Just like in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, where Michael, the archangel, was, of course, standing, nitzavim, for Israel. So the avenging here, where it says it avenged for their adversaries, the avenging here isn't arbitrary, but it's actually equitable. It's restoring the balance. It's restoring the balance. You see, the heavenly melachim, angels, can be called upon to defend or bind enemies. Not out of revenge, but to maintain divine order and balance. It's really a mirroring or a reflection of divine justice. Because as the righteous, the Zaddik, the Melchizedek, we are to invoke justice through authority, not through chaos. That's how the wicked work. The righteous invokes justice through authority, not through chaos. Romans chapter 12, verse 19. Vengeance is mine, saith Yahweh. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 6. It is just for Elohim to repay with affliction those who afflict you. So the best revenge, what's the best revenge that you can have on your enemies, brethren? your success. The best revenge is success. Keep on striving for betterment, for success. That's the best revenge that you can have on your enemies. True vengeance in wisdom is a measured triumph. Now is when we rise above our enemies through discipline and dominance. Not anger, not bitterness, but discipline and dominance. Israel was avenged by rising into identity and inheritance. And that's exactly what we should do. Look at verse 4. When they were thirsty, they called upon thee, and water was given them out of the flinty rock, and their thirst was quenched out of the hard stone. The flinty rock, the Hebrew word there is tsur. And of course, it's Mashiach's in messianic in typology or typology here, I should say. 1 Corinthians chapter 10:4 explains that. The rock that followed them was Mashiach. Deuteronomy 32 verse 4. He is the rock. He is the work that is perfect. Right? That's of course the typology. So out of this hard place, this rock, comes what? Living water. That's fulfillment of prophetic longing, which is exactly what Isaiah spoke about in Isaiah chapter 55, verse 1, where it is written, Ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye to the waters, and he that hath no money, come ye buy and eat. Yea, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Of course, this was spoken of by Mashiach himself in the book of John, because this is a prophecy that's multifolding before our very, very eyes. There's a lot here to unpack. Think about the water that comes from the rock. Water is the first element in consecration. Mikveh, for example. Before invoking angels or before invoking mysterious intelligences in the heaven, we must undergo purification or a ritual cleansing. Symbolically, water for an impossible source equals a divine initiation. That was water from an impossible source, a dry, flinty rock, but it brought forth what? Divine initiation. So these obstacles, brethren, that we come across in our life, like the wildernesses that we walk through sometimes, they aren't there to stop us. These obstacles, they're there to make us prove how bad we want it. Do you want it? Do you want the blessing? Do you want the promised land? These obstacles are there for us to prove ourselves how bad we want it. Do you want the promised land? Do you want the promises of Yahweh? Well, prove it. Walk in his ways. Water from the rock is the ultimate, though, isn't it? It's getting life from what the world says is dead. And that's the faith of the believer. Oh, there's nothing. Those dead books, that old dead book, it's thousands of years old. Well, we get life from what the world says is dead. And that, brethren, is called resourcefulness. We've got to be resourceful as believers. A core principle of believing is being resourceful if we want to make successes out of scarcity. That's what believers do. We can turn anything around in him. We make successes out of scarcity. Look at verse 5. For by what things their enemies were punished, by the same they in their need were benefited. For instead of a fountain of a perpetual running river, troubled with foul blood, for a manifest reproof of that commandment, whereby the infants were slain, thou gavest unto them abundance of water by a means which they hoped not for, declaring by that thirst then how thou hadst punished their adversaries. This, brethren, is Hebraic equity theology. Hebraic equity theology. This is, in the Hebrew phrase, which camera am I looking at? This one, right? No, this one? Oh, this one. Okay, sorry. Lost you there. Hebraic equity theology, or the Hebrew term is midah keneged midah, measure for measure, how it's meted out. So think about this. The Egyptians suffered plague through water, didn't they? Blood. Israel drank the blessing through water, the rock. What is that? That's divine symmetry. It's both poetic and judicial. That's called in the Hebrew midah keneg midah, measure for measure, or what I call Hebraic equity theology. It's perfect. It's really a mystical reversal. The same elements, for example, water, can bind or bless depending on its invocation. The prophet calls forth dual-natured forces for destruction or courage. What's it going to be? Romans chapter 8, verse 28. All things, all means all things work together for good for those who love Elohim. Even the enemy's tools become blessings in divine economy. I choose to turn every loss into a lesson. How about you? We've only got so many days here numbered on this earth, and you're going to have losses, but choose to turn every loss into a lesson. They're building blocks. Your failures are your building blocks for your successes, if you're willing to stand on your failures. It's okay to fail, because that means you tried. I mean, it's really like spiritual jiu-jitsu, brethren. We use the enemy's weight against them. That's what we do. We let hardship become a harvest in our lives. That's what we do. We do spiritual jiu-jitsu on the enemy. We use their weight against them, and hardships become a harvest in our lives. Look at verses 6 through 8. Instead of a fountain, thou gavest unto them abundance of water, declaring by that thirst how thou hadst punished their adversaries. This is both punitive and instructive, isn't it? Thirst is both physical lack and a spiritual need. The same element, water, that killed infants, the Nile blood, now sustains life in the desert water. I mean, this is equitable justice, isn't it? You can see it. John chapter 4, verse 13, whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. John chapter 7, verse 38, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. That's equitable justice. Water is used to cleanse. It's used to empower. It's used to divide, symbolizing what? Both death and resurrection. I mean, think on this for a second. You get to choose how you react to things in this life. You either let it harden you or you let it hone you. They're just choices. It's how you react. I choose to let it hone me. Yahweh let Israel taste thirst. But that wasn't to destroy Israel, was it? But it was to deepen their desire. He let them thirst to deepen their desire. Thirst is holy when it leads to a divine supply. So your lack can lead to a divine supply if you are on the right path of the righteous. So wisdom's actions then in this chapter, you're going to see their lessons. This is a text of lessons. This is a lesson book for life for us, brethren. These are lessons, and these are our blessings. And it's like alchemy. It really is. Hardship, enemies, scarcity, they all become fuel for identity, fuel for discipline, and fuel for transformation. Use it as fuel. Use it as fuel. It's really the Solomonic symbolic continuity. Purification, elemental control, and the mastery of dual forces all require chokmah, wisdom. They all require intention. In the Hebrew, kavanah, intention. Verse 9. For when they were tried, albeit, but in mercy chastised, they knew how the ungodly were judged in wrath and tormented, thirsting in another manner than the just. Verse 10. For these thou didst admonish and try as a father, but the others, as a severe king, thou didst condemn and punish. Whether they were absent or present, they were vexed alike. For a double grief came upon them, and a groaning for the remembrance of past things. For when they heard by their own punishments the other to be benefited, they had some feeling of Yahweh. What does that mean? They had some feeling of Yahweh. This speaks about the righteous are disciplined in mercy. Chesed, right? We're disciplined in mercy, not to break us, but to refine us. That's what Psalm 92 is all about. This is covenantal testing. This is not punitive judgment upon Israel. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6. Whom the master loves, he chastises. Romans chapter 2, verse 4. Do not you despise the riches of his mercy, not knowing it leads you to repentance. Right? Purification and discipline, brethren. The saint is tried before power is granted. That's what wisdom is teaching us. You are going to be tried in your life before power is granted to you. Divine mercy, well, it's measured. It's quantitative. We must first endure before we command the angels. And isn't that what we're to do? But first we must endure before we get to command the angels. It's true in this life. I mean, think about it at your job. You have aspirations of becoming the boss. Well, you can't become the boss unless you've first been a soldier. You got to be a soldier first so that you can become the boss. I mean, it works in life. It's a spiritual reality. So Yahweh's mercy is really in chastening, because that's the boot camp of his greatness. The wicked are judged in isolation, but the righteous, we see that they are tested in relationship. In relationship. Look at verse 10. We're going to see father versus a king, because that equals mercy versus wrath. Look at the difference between the covenantal family versus the condemned empire. You've got the covenantal family of Israel, and then you've got the condemned empire, Egypt. Systematic oppression. In John chapter 15, verse 15, it's written, no longer do I call you servants, I call you friends. The children of Elohim, we're not ruled, we're raised. That's the difference. We're not ruled, we're raised. Gevurah, the Hebrew word for severity. Chesed, the Hebrew word for mercy. They've got to be balanced. There must be a balance in our life between severity and mercy. Here, Israel receives Gevurah, severity. Yes, they do. But as a fatherly correction. Egypt receives it as a punitive force. That's the difference. When we receive Gevurah, severity, it's a fatherly correction. But when the unrighteous, they receive Gevurah, it's a punitive force in their life. And that's what we see. So all this makes me ponder as I go through this chapter. It's not how you start, but it's how you're shaped during the whole process. It's how you're shaped. Yahweh doesn't form champions like tyrants form slaves and forge slaves, you know. No. Training from a father, it truly prepares us. Punishment from a king, well, that destroys. In verses 11 and 12, there's torment of memory, and then there's torment of presence. You see this full circle justice. There's groanings for the past. And think about this. Do you groan for something in the past? Well, usually if there's groanings in the past, it means that there's some unresolved guilt in your life. It's called the circle of regret. And you don't want that. Look at Luke chapter 16, verse 12. Luke chapter 16, verse 25. Of course, the rich man and Lazarus. That's the circle of regret. There's groaning and there's some unresolved guilt in this man's life, but it's too late. Remember your good things? Now he is comforted and you are tormented. That's the circle of regret. You can't have that. You don't want to live that way. Regret is worse than failure. At least failure moves you forward because it's the building block to your next success if you have the courage to stand on your failure. Right? But the unrighteous, they live in spiritual paralysis. They're unable to move past their sins. Their sins ensnare them. They have spiritual paralysis in their life. The just are tried, the just are promoted. The wicked, they remember, and the wicked, they decay. It's pretty sobering when you really ponder what's being spoken of in these wisdom chapters. In verse 13, we're going to look at and see redemptive irony just unfold before our very eyes. The suffering of the wicked, it becomes a theological epiphany, not out of repentance, but envy and awe. The feeling of Yahweh. It's not that they've all of a sudden felt Yahweh and comes into salvation. No, it's that they acknowledge his divine distinction. Yeah, they feel Yahweh because they acknowledge his divine distinction. The difference between the wheat and the chaff is separated. How Yahweh deals with the righteous and how he deals with the wicked is extremely different, and they're acknowledging that. Philippians chapter 2, verse 10, every knee shall bow. Even the damned will recognize the sovereignty of the righteous judge, Yahweh. So we need to, as we live this life here, we need to focus on successes. And we need to let our successes be loud enough that even our enemies listen. Even punishment can become proof of purpose or proof of work. Israel's benefit under divine correction, it becomes a sermon for their enemies, right? Yes. The nations knew, they heard about Israel's punishment and their divine correction in the wilderness, but it became the sermon that was used on their enemies. Look at verse 14. For whom they rejected with scorn when he was long before thrown out at the casting forth of the infants. In him in the end, when they saw what come to pass, they admired. But for the foolish devices of their wickedness, wherewith being deceived they worship serpents void of reason, and vile beasts. Thou didst send a multitude of unreasonable beasts upon them for vengeance, that they might know that wherewithal a man sinneth, by the same shall he be punished. That's sobering. Moshe, once rejected and cast aside, of course, becomes the admired liberator. You see? This is the divine reversal. Humiliation leads to exaltation, I should say. Look at Acts chapter 7, verse 35, where Stephen gives his address, and he says, this Moshe, whom they rejected, saying, who made you ruler? Him Elohim sent. And then Psalm 118, verse 22, the stone the builders rejected. Have you been rejected because you're a believer? I know I have. I've been banned from speaking, or people try to stop me from speaking because they know I'm a believer. Oh, get him. We don't want he'll start talking about God. We can't have him come speak. Why? That humiliation turns to exaltation. Power is often invisible, brethren, in its early stages. And we're powerfully and wonderfully made, and we are powerful as believers, but power is often invisible in its early stages. The rejected become the revered when their fruit matures. Let your fruit mature. Let your fruit mature. There is hope, and the future is bright. Now, in verse 15, we start to see the distinction. Idolatry and irony comes into view. Israel's oppressors, they worship symbols of their own downfall, serpents and beasts, which are now turned against them. In Romans chapter 1, verse 22, it's written, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and worshipped creeping things. We see that today. And then they're caught up in ungodly lusts for one another. In John chapter 3, verse 14, the bronze serpent as reversal of course, a serpentine curse comes into view. You see, when man worships lower entities, he forfeits dominion. How many people on their phone and the things they look up are worshipping lower entities? And then they forfeit dominion in their life. And you wonder why people are depressed and suicidal, because they're forfeiting, of course, dominion, because they've been worshipping lower entities. Don't give your power to things that can't grow you. Go out there and create. Go out there and build. Don't give your power to things that won't grow you. Worshipping unreasoning forces, whether it be wealth, whether it be addiction, whether it be lusts, whether it be status, they all lead to personal devolution. What you bow to, well, that's what you become. That's what you become. In verse 16, we're going to see now that they might know that wherewithal a man sinneth, by the same shall he, of course, be punished. This is a universal principle. Midah keneg midah, measure for measure. How you meted it out, it will be meted out back to you. This is divine symmetry in justice. Like Haman, of course, he was hanged on his own gallows, was he not? Sin becomes its own sword. Beware, beware. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. Whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Sin becomes its own sword. Misuse brings judgment through the same conduit. The ritual turns against the conjurer in this case. Because sin is a contract. If you don't realize that, then you're without understanding. Sin is a simple contract. And like all contracts, it has reciprocity. What you use to trap others, it traps you. What you manipulate eventually exposes you. Verse 17. For thy almighty hand that made the world of matter without form wanted not means to send among them a multitude of bears or fierce lions or unknown wild beasts full of rage, newly created, breathing out either a fiery vapor or filthy scents of scattered smoke, or shooting horrible sparkles out of their eyes, whereof not only the harm might dispatch them at once, but also the terrible sight utterly destroy them. It's poetic, isn't it? Verse 20. Yea, and without these might they have fallen down with one blast, being persecuted of vengeance and scattered abroad through the breath of thy power. But thou hast ordered all things in measure and number and weight. In measure, in number, and weight. For thou canst show thy great strength at all times when thou wilt, and who may withstand the power of thine arm? Verse 22. For the whole world before thee is as a little grain of the balance, yea, as a drop of the morning dew that falleth down upon the earth. But thou hast mercy upon all, for thou canst do all things, and winkest at the sins of men, because they should amend. For thou lovest all the things that are, and abhorrest nothing which thou hast made. For never wouldest thou have made anything if thou hadst hated it. And how could anything have endured if it had not been thy will, or been preserved if not cooled by thee? But thou sparest all, for they are thine, O Master, thou lover of souls. Think of this, verse 25. And how could anything have endured if it had not been thy will, or been preserved if not cooled by thee? This really echoes Bereshit, Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. The tohu vohu, formless and void. So the Almighty hand signals absolute dominion over both creation and chaos. Of course, the beasts in the text symbolize raw, untamed, brute force. And we need to pray to bind such forces that come against us in life. In Revelation chapters 6 through 9, we see apocalyptic beasts, of course, with all of these elements of fiery breath and stinking breath, a supernatural force. And they're a mirror image of this. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 53, Yahushua said, do you not think I could call down 12 legions of angels? But he withholds the judgment, does he not? You see, power isn't just about what you do, it's about what you could do, but you don't. Because like Yahweh, true strength lies in restraint. Restrain the tongue, restrain the eyes. True strength lies in restraint. You don't need to send the legions when you know you could. And your adversaries, well, they know it too. They know it too. So why? In verses 19 through 20, we see, of course, psychological warfare comes into play and divine proportionality. Terrible sight, utterly destroy them. But thou hadst ordered all things in measure and number and weight. Because Yahweh's judgment, it can't be purely visual, brethren, but he acts with logistic precision, like a general of an army. Logistical precision, measure, number, and weight. Sure, chaos is power, but disciplined chaos, well, that's sovereignty. That's what we want, disciplined chaos, because that brings sovereignty. Verses 21 and 22, we see Yahweh's transcendence is emphasized through the comparative scale of grain of balance and dew of drop. And of course, that echoes Isaiah chapter 40, verse 15, where it's written, the nations are as a drop in the bucket. And they are, because Yahweh holds all power. Yet really he acts in such tenderness, does he not? I mean, this is the paradox of presence. It's infinite, yet immanent. You can be the Jew in your life, not the flood, and still transform everything and everyone around you. Why be the flood when you can be the Jew? You'll still be able to transform everything around you. Verses 23 and 24, we see that mercy is not Yahweh's reaction, but it's his disposition. Thou lovest all that exists, it says. This is a divine affirmation of being. You're here. You're alive. I'm alive. This is divine affirmation of just being. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9, not willing that any should perish, but all come to teshuvah, repentance. John chapter 3, verse 17. Elohim did not send his Son to condemn the world. So verses 25 and 26, your existence, my existence, this isn't some freak biological accident, but this is a divine appointment. Yahweh calls into being by will, by sovereignty, because he is the lover of souls. Yahweh is a lover of life, not just merely a judge of sin. In Luke 15, you see the parables of the lost sheep, the lost coin, the son. They all center around his enduring and preserving love. And this has hit me hard this week, because the fact that I woke up today means I'm not finished. And I don't want to waste the extra breath that Yahweh has given me, because I'm still standing. And because I'm still standing, I know Yahweh is still working, because preservation equals purpose. I've been preserved. You've been preserved, because preservation equals purpose. You're still breathing? That means you're chosen. If you're alive, then you're on assignment. And that's what this chapter's about. So stay in the fight. Life is good. We have the Ruach HaKodesh, and wisdom is all around us if we'll only persevere and press in. Shabbat Shalom.